An error in calculating both aircraft weight and balance and power available versus power required to hover resulted in this mishap. The crew attempted to fly this Cobra into an out-of-ground effect hover with full armament and full fuel. The Dash 10 indicates that for these conditions, power simply is not available. Pilot technique cannot overcome the basic laws of physics. The Dash 10 clearly shows that a UH-1 with full fuel and 8 passengers could not complete a successful takeoff from the 8,200-foot density altitude pickup zone. But the crew did no performance planning. 7 were killed. We all know about pre-flight planning. We know what we're supposed to do and why. But sometimes, well, it just doesn't always get done. And that's not smart. Just ask any mishap investigator. So let's go through the procedures and review how to do it all. Along the way, we'll give you some tips that make the job easier. This is Warrant Officer Walt Probka. We're going to observe him as he does his flight planning for tomorrow's missions. Walt's unit is taking part in a field training exercise. His first mission of the day will be an early morning flight, lifting 6 combat-loaded troops to landing zone Echo. It will be a terrain flight mission. He'll need the ability to hover out of ground effect. Predicted temperature for this mission, 25 degrees Celsius, and pressure altitude of 2,000 feet. Midday, we'll see Walt refueling. His other mission for the day will be at 13:30, when he'll lift a sling load of 1,400 pounds for landing zone Charlie. Weather forecast calls for a hot afternoon, 35 degrees Celsius. Pressure altitude in the operating area will be 2,000 feet. With his briefings completed, he is ready to begin his flight planning. Here are the planning steps he's going to go through. First, he'll determine his maximum torque available. Next, the performance limit. Then he'll use the performance limit to figure his torque required to hover, or go, no-go value. The numbers then have to be converted to indicated values for his aircraft. Finally, he'll check the weight and balance for each mission. He begins with maximum torque available for the morning mission. This value comes right off the maximum torque available chart in the Dash 10. For a pressure altitude of 2,000 feet, he traces across to the predicted morning temperature, in Celsius, 25 degrees. Then straight down from there to find the maximum torque, in this case, 48 psi calibrated. Instead of letting everybody make pencil marks on the chart in the Dash 10 until it becomes practically unreadable, many units now run off copies of the chart. You can mark it up all you want, take it with you, then throw it away after the flight. To find the performance limit, you use the hover chart. Enter with the maximum torque that you just determined, 48, and trace up to the hover height you want. Walt will use the 50-foot hover line since his mission involves terrain flight. Draw the horizontal line all the way across. Next, you enter with pressure altitude, 2,000 feet, trace across to the predicted temperature, 25 degrees Celsius, then down. Where it intersects with the line you previously drew, read off the gross weight in pounds. This is the performance limit. Now let's look at another tool useful in the performance planning process, the takeoff and landing data card, TOL card, also called the performance planning card. Having a completed TOL card available makes an aviator's job a little easier. To find the go, no-go torque, you go back into the chart along the same line you just drew. Follow it to the 5-foot skid height curve, draw a line down, and read off the calibrated torque. Here, it's 41 psi. If your type aircraft has a calibration factor, you will need it for the conversion to indicated values. It is available in the flight planning room or from the engine data plate. The chart for converting is on the maximum torque available page. Locate your calibration factor. Trace up from the calibrated torque for go, no-go, 41 psi, to the line labeled with your calibration factor, then across to the indicated value, 43 psi. You also find the indicated value for maximum torque available the same way. This information is recorded on the takeoff and landing data card, completing both the departure and arrival sections. Next, the same computations for the afternoon flight. Again, on the maximum torque available chart, you enter with altitude and temperature and find maximum torque available. Because of the higher temperature, you already know that performance will not be as good. Now enter the hover chart with the calibrated torque just found, 43 psi. This time, however, he uses the 15-foot hover height line because that will be his skid height while hovering with this particular sling load. Then, enter with the altitude and temperature again and trace down. The performance limit turns out to be 9,000 pounds for this mission. After completing the performance calculations, the next step is weight and balance. You need to get the weight and balance clearance forms, which are on file for your aircraft. On any mission when you're carrying a standard load, chances are there's already a current form computed and in the file. If there is, you won't need to do the computations. The morning mission is to carry 6 combat-loaded troops. Walt finds a form for this load, so he only needs to check the gross takeoff weight and make sure it's less than the performance limit for the mission. He also must consider that flying with the cargo doors open can shift his CG aft 1/2 inch or more. But the afternoon mission is not a standard load, and there's nothing in the file on it. This one he'll have to compute. The first part of this is straightforward. A lot of figures you can pick up right off the previously computed forms on file, provided they are current. Next, the moment for this load. There are 2 ways to get it. Look it up in the Dash 10 or multiply the cargo weight by the fuselage station. The payload is going to be 1,400 pounds. Which gives a moment of 1,926. Enter this information on the form. Add the columns to get your total weight and total moment for takeoff condition. With a sling load of 1,400 pounds, gross takeoff weight is going to be 9,100 pounds, or 100 pounds over the performance limit. Here's the question he's facing. How would you answer it? In this situation, the pilot should fly the mission since gross weight is only 100 pounds over the limit, use less than the full load of fuel, have the cargo load reduced, or refuse to fly the mission. The answer in this case is use less than the full load of fuel. By taking on less fuel, he'll be within the performance limit, but still have far more than enough for the assigned missions. Incidentally, you are responsible for the safe operation of your aircraft. An order to fly doesn't make you any less responsible. Instead of recomputing the whole sheet, the easier way is to use the corrections block. The first step is to enter the weight and moment of the original fuel load. To provide a good margin of safety, he's decided to take on only 1,000 pounds of fuel, which is 300 pounds less than a full load. The moment for 1,000 pounds of fuel is 1,471. He enters this information also in the corrections block. Then he'll subtract the new fuel load weight and moment from the old values. The net difference is applied to obtain the corrected takeoff condition. Now he's ready to check his CG and make sure he's within limits. Then he'll go on to compute the landing CG, being careful to follow the directions in the dash 10 for determining the fuel moment, which is to be subtracted. On his 5-foot hover, Walt finds he needs more torque than he expected. The aircraft is performing as if its gross weight were higher than calculated. But this is still acceptable, since the torque value is at or below the go, no-go value of 43 psi indicated. Midday now, and time for refueling. It's not always easy to get less than full tanks. Unless you supervise it yourself, you're liable to end up with more fuel than you wanted. Nobody knows how many accidents have happened because the aircraft was over gross, having more fuel on board than was necessary for the mission. By taking on 300 pounds less than full, he's given himself a 200 pounds margin. Walt likes to give himself a safety margin because he knows, for example, that fuel density varies with temperature, and that on a hot day, high humidity can rob him of 200 pounds of lift capability. 15-foot hover, and the torque is go. En route from refueling to the sling load pickup point, Walt receives a mission change.
Tango 6-2, this is Top Hat.
Tango 6-2, go.
Tango 6-2, we have a mission change. Cancel the sling load. Pick up 2 packs and some equipment at the same PZ. Drop them off at LZ Bravo.
Tango 6-2, roger out.
A mission like this presents a somewhat different type of planning problem. They weren't given the weight of the cargo. It's not likely anybody knows how much it weighs. And another thing, it seems landing zone Bravo is at 4,000 feet, 2,000 above their present location. The first thing you need to do the performance planning for the new mission is the temperature at landing zone Bravo. You can estimate it using the current local temperature of 35 degrees and subtracting the standard lapse rate of 2 degrees per 1,000 feet, or 4 degrees, to obtain 31 degrees. Turn to the maximum torque available chart. Enter with 4,000 feet over to 31 degrees and down to 42 psi calibrated. Convert this to an indicated value of 43.5 and enter it in the maximum torque available section of the toll card. Then turn to the hover chart. Enter the top chart with 4,000 feet and 31 degrees. Draw a line down. Enter the left chart with 42 psi, go up to 50 foot skid height, and over to the first line. The intersection is the performance limit, 8,200 pounds. The next step is a bit tricky. You've got the maximum gross at destination. Now you need to figure the go, no-go at your present location. That will tell you whether your actual weight is acceptable. Draw a line through the 8,200 position, add 200 pounds for burned fuel, 8,400. From there, go over to the 5-foot hover skid height line and down to find the calibrated torque, 36 psi. On the maximum torque available chart, this 36 psi converts to 37.5 indicated, the torque required to hover at 5 feet. This way, you can check at departure whether you'll be okay when you reach destination. And when you're going to be landing at a place where the altitude or temperature is significantly higher, this method can be very important to your health. Performance and weight and balance planning doesn't take very long to do. It gives you the confidence of knowing you're within limits, knowing that you can hover out of ground effect if you have to. A little time that pays off in big dividends of added safety.
This is all that's left of an OH-58. The co-pilot survived. He was thrown out when the aircraft broke apart as it crashed into the lake. Divers found the pilot's body on the bottom of the lake, still strapped in his seat. He was at the controls when the accident happened. Boaters saw the helicopter just before it crashed. It was flying less than 5 feet above the water at around 100 knots. There was nothing wrong with the aircraft. It was just too low and too fast. The aircraft was on a routine training mission. The weather was perfect. There was just one thing wrong. The pilot. It wasn't that he didn't know his business. He was well trained, and he had more than 1,000 hours, most of them in OH-58s. He had been a PIC for more than a year, and he loved to fly. The problem was, he liked to fly low and fast, and he did it that way often, even though he knew about the OH-58's 400-foot altitude restriction. The way he looked at it, helicopters are built to fly low as a pilot wants to fly. And that's the way he wanted to fly. And that's the way he flew. In the past 12 months, 6 operational hazard reports had been filed on this pilot for violations of procedures. Why in a unit where everybody, other aviators, crew chiefs, the safety officer, the platoon leader, and the unit commander himself knew this pilot was unsafe, didn't somebody do something to stop him? There were several reasons, but none of them were good reasons. Friends of the pilot killed in the crash were reluctant to report a buddy. When reports of the pilot's unsafe flying continued, the safety officer, standardization officer, and platoon leader went to the unit commander and recommended that the aviator be grounded. But the commander decided counseling was the thing to do. He had only 3 pilots to fly the unit's 6 OH-58s, and he thought some of the things the pilot was accused of might not be as bad as they sounded. So, everybody knew they had a high-risk aviator in the unit, but nothing was done to stop him from flying the way he did. The last person who had a chance to do something was the acting unit commander. He was the co-pilot on the day of the accident. He had flown with this pilot before, and he had told him more than once that he was flying too low. On this day, too, he had told the pilot he was too low. But then he looked down at his map, and the next thing he knew, he was in the water. When there's someone who doesn't follow the standards, someone who refuses to fly by the rules, someone who takes unnecessary risks, someone has to care enough to do something about it. Or share the responsibility when something happens. Individual soldiers must care enough about their professional performance and the performance of the other members of their unit to police themselves and their fellow soldiers. Leaders must care enough to fix accountability, set standards of performance, and require that all pilots follow those standards.
Helicopter ground signals, useful for giving pilots guidance during sling loading, landing, and ground handling procedures, if radios are not being used, or if it would be dangerous for them to be used because the enemy is near. Ground signals are also useful when the helicopter has a bottom hatch through which the crew chief may look, since the crew chief may have blind spots or may not see all that is required. This presentation will demonstrate most of the official Army aircraft ground signals in FM 21-60. It is suggested that you review the signals in FM 21-60 to ensure that you are able to give them accurately and distinctly whenever needed. Here, a CH-47 helicopter is approaching a forward supply point in order to sling load a resupply of ammunition and deliver it to a combat force in the field. As the helicopter approaches, the signaler shows the pilot the desired landing direction. His arms are rigid overhead, palms inward. As the helicopter begins to hover over the load, the signaler must move to a position about 45 degrees off the pilot's side of the helicopter, remaining in the pilot's sight at all times. The signal being made indicates to the pilot to move the helicopter ahead. The palms are up, facing backwards, and are repeatedly moved backward at shoulder height. The pilot is directed to stop. The signaler's arms form an X above the head. Should he overshoot the hookup point, the pilot can be signaled to move back. The signaler's arms are at his sides, palms forward, and are swept forward and upward repeatedly to shoulder height. The signaler now requests the pilot to hover the aircraft. Arms are extended horizontally, sideways, palms downward in a T formation. To get the pilot to move the aircraft down, the signaler beckons downwards from the hover position. The rapidity of the movement indicates the rate of descent. The faster the movement, the quicker the rate. Now the helicopter is in position for the hookup. The hover signal is given, and the hookup men complete the hookup. The signaler indicates the hookup is completed by placing his fists high in a rope climbing position. He then bumps his fists together. When the hookup men are clear of the helicopter, the move upward signal is given until the load is correctly suspended. The palms are up and the arms are moved upwards. The signalman then gives the pilot the takeoff signal by making a circular motion over his head with his right hand ending with a throwing motion in the direction of takeoff. If the helicopter were delivering these supplies, the signaler would want to give the release sling load signal. For this, the left arm is pointed forward horizontally, fist clenched. The right hand, palm down, makes a slicing motion below the left arm. To signal that the load has not been released, the left arm is horizontal across the chest with fist clenched. The right hand is pointed vertically to the center of the left fist. To reply to a query from the pilot, the affirmative signal is a hand raised, thumb up, and the negative signal is hand raised, thumb down. Let's review the signals shown thus far. Identify each signal as it is given. Desired landing direction. Move ahead. Stop. Move back. Move downwards. Hover. Hookup completed. Move upwards. Take off. Release sling load. Load has not been released. Affirmative. Negative. On the flight line, ground signals are often a crucial means of communication. Ground signals between personnel can be used in a variety of situations every day to prevent problems and alleviate danger. If appropriate, the signaler may signal remove blade tie-downs by raising the left hand above the head and pointing the right hand to the individual boots for removal. The signal connect GPU is given when the hands are extended overhead and then the first two fingers of the right hand are pushed into the fist of the other hand. To signal start engines, the signaler raises his left hand with fingers extended to indicate the number of the engine to be started. The right hand makes a circular motion at head level. For disconnect GPU, the two fingers are pulled away from the left fist. To indicate that the engine on one side should be slowed, the right or left arm, according to the engine to be slowed, is waved up and down. The other arm is down. To signal to remove chocks, the pilot moves his fists outward with thumbs extended. The signaler indicates that someone is approaching the aircraft. His left hand is raised overhead, palm forward. The other hand points to the approaching person and gestures towards the aircraft. The pilot gives the clearance for the approach by beckoning with his right hand at eye level. The signaler repeats the signal to confirm clearance to the person approaching, and then gives the signal to remove chocks by sweeping his fists outward at hip level, thumbs extended. The signaler acknowledges to the pilot that the chocks have been removed. Next, the signal is given to release brakes. Arms are above the head, fists closed and then opened. If the brakes must be applied, palms begin open and then are closed. The signal is given to insert chocks. Arms are down and swinging, fists closed, with thumbs pointing inwards. This is the same signal the other soldier will give after inserting the chocks to mean chocks inserted. To signal cut engines, either hand extends across the neck in a throat-cutting motion. If a specific engine is to be cut, the other hand points to the appropriate engine. If it should ever be needed, the engine fire signal is a figure 8 motion with one hand, while the other points to the fire area. Again, let's review the signals. Apply brakes. Release brakes. Insert chocks. Personnel approach the aircraft. Clearance for personnel to approach the aircraft. Chocks inserted. Remove chocks or chocks removed. Connect GPU. Disconnect GPU. Start engines. Slow down engine on indicated side. Cut engines. Remove blade tie-downs. Engine fire. Now we face a different situation. A helicopter is approaching an area where landmines, trip flares, and other perimeter defensive devices have been placed, and it must set down in a designated safe landing spot. Signals typically used in marshalling helicopters will be used here to bring about a safe landing. The signaler tells the pilot to slow down. His arms are down, with his palms toward the ground as they are moved up and down. Next, the signaler will direct the pilot to move to right. The left arm extends horizontally sideways in the direction of movement. The right arm is swung over the head in the same direction in repeating movements. The signaler gives the move to left signal. He extends his right arm and swings his left arm. If the signaler sees that the tail of the helicopter should move to the right, he points his right arm down and moves his left arm from overhead vertical to horizontal forward repeatedly. For the tail to move left, The left arm is pointed down, and the right arm goes from overhead vertical to forward horizontal repeatedly. The helicopter is now positioned for a safe landing. The signaller gives the signal to land by crossing his arms downwards in front of his body. Let's review the signals just given. Slow down. Move to right. Move to left. Tail to left. Tail to right. Land. At night, signal...
This is where performance planning starts. This is where it might end if it's not done right. What you're about to see is the result of poor performance planning in two different accidents. The pilot of a UH-1 received a mission to pick up soldiers from a pinnacle. The pilot figured his performance planning using in-ground effect hover power. Let's let him tell us what happened.
I got the mission the week before. My commander briefed me and I thought I knew pretty well what to expect. Other pilots flew the mission the day before I did with no problems.
John and I did our pre-flight around 6 o'clock in the morning, and we decided to do the whole mission with only one aircraft. Sergeant Jones was our crew chief. We moved the first load of troops and refueled. While we were inbound for the second load, we were asked to carry all 9 remaining soldiers out in one trip. I said I'd make that determination in the LZ.
The pilot made the decision to pick up all the soldiers at once, without any further planning.
Yeah, I think we got enough power to do this.
It would save him another trip back to the pinnacle. After they were strapped in, the pilot asked the co-pilot to monitor torque as he brought the aircraft to a 2-foot hover.
Okay, John, give me about 4 takeoff by the book, and monitor my torque for me, please. Okay, RPM 6600. Systems instruments were good. Avionics are good. Crew passenger missed equipment secured. I'll monitor your torque. Secure. Roger. (21, 24, 26, 28, 32, 36, 36, 36.
But then, the UH-1 started an immediate and uncommanded right turn. He couldn't put it back down because of trees near the tail rotor. He applied full left pedal without getting a response. He felt committed to depart the pinnacle and applied forward cycling.
LTE, can't stop. What? Jones! Throw it out! All of it! What? Throw it out! All the rucks! Everything! Hurry! Everything! Yes, sir! All of it!
The pilot had his hands full with a helicopter that didn't want to fly, and a flight that was going to be anything but routine. The crew chief and passengers threw out everything they could. Let's hear the crew chief describe what happened next.
Even when the UE started to spin, it took a minute for me to realize we were in trouble. I knew we were close to max gross, so we had to reduce our weight or crash. I was shocked to be throwing out equipment, but it worked. We did hit something with the bottom of the aircraft just before we cleared the crest.
After the impact, I did manage to get the aircraft pointed down slope while we jettisoned everything we could. I'm just thankful that no one was hurt.
They were just too heavy. When the pilot figured gross weight, he used in-ground effect hover power instead of the out-of-ground effect hover that was required. They were actually 1,300 pounds overweight. They had just refueled, and when they loaded the 9 soldiers, they took on more than the Huey could handle. That pilot misfigured his performance data. The pilot in this next accident used the wrong charts.
After 10 sling load operations in mountainous closed-in terrain, the crew of the CH-54 was packing up their equipment to go home. The previous operations had gone without incident, even though performance planning for the mission had been miscalculated from the beginning. Cooler temperatures earlier in the day gave them the fudge factor they needed to accomplish their mission. However, by the time they wrapped things up, warmer weather and poor performance planning were getting ready to take their toll. These experienced aviators did not accurately compute their performance planning data. When they checked the charts to see if they would be able to take off, they used the wrong ones. By their calculations, they were within gross weight limitations when, in reality, they were almost 4,000 pounds overweight for the conditions. When they tried to take off, they didn't have the power they needed to clear the 30-foot trees. The crew demanded more of the aircraft than it could give, and it did exactly what the book says it will do under these circumstances.
Something has gone wrong. Something has really gone wrong. He hit the dirt. It didn't make it.
The 4-man crew escaped unharmed. They got away with poor performance planning 10 times, but it only took once to get caught. This time, circumstances changed just enough to take the fudge factor out of the equation. Close is just not good enough when it comes to performance planning.
Emotions, emotional problems, tension, anxiety, mental strain. These words seem to be very common. They're used much more today than they were 50 years ago because our daily life has changed very radically in those 50 years. Not so very long ago, life was relatively placid, tranquil and calm, no great emotional strain. Today we are living in the midst of the greatest social and technical change ever to take place in the history of mankind. The demands of our daily life put an emotional strain on all of us. Hurry, worry, deadlines to meet, bills to pay. When our minds become too preoccupied with too many of these problems, we can easily become the star performer in an accident. Here's an example of how easily emotional problems or worries could lead to an accident. Most of us have had this experience at one time or another.
Sir, you just drove through a stop sign 2 blocks back.
Me? I did?
Yes, sir. That fellow in the black car hadn't been on the ball. You might have killed him. Yeah, I see your license and registration, please.
I don't know why I did it. I've stopped at that sign 100 times. I guess my mind just wasn't on my driving. I must have been thinking about something else.
Right. He was thinking of something else. Perhaps married life isn't turning out right. His new wife isn't adjusting to Army life. Or perhaps his wife is in the hospital with a complicated pregnancy. Could be his first child, or his mother or father is seriously ill. Or it may be a financial problem. Perhaps a new boat and motor he wishes he hadn't bought now that he has unexpected overseas orders. These are the kinds of emotional problems we're concerned about. If that aviator had been flying with something on his mind, he could just as easily have failed to realize that his oil pressure was falling rapidly. But the distracting problems which cause accidents aren't always grim and unpleasant. I drove the first car I ever owned into a tree while daydreaming about an upcoming date with a blonde high school senior. But that was a lucky accident. I wasn't hurt seriously, and I learned a lifelong lesson. Don't daydream while driving or flying. In the files of the Army Board for Aviation Accident Research, there are a number of accidents which have been traced directly to emotional causes. Flight surgeons are the experts for the Army on the emotional aspects of accidents. Colonel Fisher is such an expert. Let's see what we can learn from him.
Good morning, Major.
Good morning, sir. We're interested in how emotional problems can cause accidents.
That's an important subject for aviators.
I thought you might review some of the cases we've had.
Did you have any particular accident in mind?
Yes, sir. I was going to ask about the case we were discussing last week.
The accident in which Lieutenant Webster was killed in an OH-23.
That's right, sir.
It's an excellent example of emotional causes, because it's one of the few cases we've been able to definitely nail down as positively caused by the distraction of an emotional upset. You see, accident investigators may suspect that an emotional disturbance is at least partially responsible for an accident, but rarely do they have sufficient proof to even mention it in their reports. In this investigation, we made a thorough study into the background of the aviator who was killed. We did this because of one fact which was agreed upon by all of the eyewitnesses. When his engine failed at an altitude of about 2,000 feet, Lieutenant Webster apparently did not take any emergency action. The aircraft lost rotor RPM, crashed, and burned. Why would an aviator do this?
He must have panicked, just froze on the controls.
Yes, but why? To try to learn why, we delved into Webster's background, his family, his personality, his problems. Webster was the youngest of 7 brothers and sisters. He was the family favorite, and they were a warm, stable, and closely knit group. Webster was a very independent person. When he made a decision, he stuck to it, sometimes even after he'd been proven wrong. This stubbornness was probably the cause of Webster's first real problem. Webster was divorced several years before the accident, but he stayed in contact with his former wife. He also made several attempts at reconciliation.
And I have to get a few new things for David and Kathy.
How are the kids, Martha?
Oh, they're fine, Bill.
I wish I could see them.
Well, you can any time, Bill. You know that.
I wish I could see you too, Martha.
Bill, please give up. I told you the last time, no. Definitely no. Now, if you don't drop the subject, I'm going to hang up.
Martha, I've learned my lesson. I'm a changed guy.
Bill, you're just as bullheaded as you ever were, or you just wouldn't keep trying.
The frustration of these rejections was difficult for Webster to take. And after each rejection, he burst out aggressively at anyone who disagreed with him. After several years of frustration, he found another girl. But the circumstances of his courtship took a heavy toll on his energy. The girl worked as an entertainer in a nightclub more than 60 miles from his post.
Anything else?
No, nothing else.
Okay.
Bill, I'm worried about you. You shouldn't be driving in every night to meet me.
That's nice. Don't you want to see me?
Sure, I want to see you. When do you get any sleep?
sleep. I get 4 or 5 hours before I drive in every night. That's enough. I told you yesterday how we could solve the problem.
Marry me, Debbie, then I don't have to drive 120 miles every night to see you.
Bill, I've thought it all over like I said I would.
Yeah?
Well, I just wouldn't fit in. I'm used to theatrical life and excitement and coming and going as I please on my own.
You'd forget all that. I know you would.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I would. But I'm not ready to yet, Bill. I don't want to give it up.
And you don't love me.
I didn't say that, honey.
We'll talk about it later.
Who gets the sandwich?
I do.
Coffee?
Apparently, Webster got himself into a new emotional problem.
That's very often the case. You've noticed how trouble seems to breed more trouble? It really does. When you're under the strain of an emotional problem, you can't think clearly or have good judgment. You get into more trouble very easily.
Was Webster on this 4 or 5 hour sleep routine at the time of the accident?
Yes. Yes, he was. And he wasn't eating properly either. For example, on the day of the accident, he had neither breakfast nor lunch.
It almost looks as if Webster was trying to hurt himself.
As a matter of fact, that may be true. Suicide can't be ruled out as a possibility.
Do you really think so, sir?
Not premeditated suicide. We know his engine failed. But perhaps when the engine quit, he had an irresistible impulse. You might say that suddenly he saw an open door through which he could escape from all of the problems which had been plaguing him.
I can see how that might be possible.
Perhaps suicide never entered his conscious mind. But when the emergency arose, his confusion and panic were so great that he simply couldn't act to save himself.
Well, what can be done about emotional problems, Colonel? How can we keep them from getting out of control?
Probably the best remedy is ventilation.
Ventilation, sir?
Yes. Opening up and letting some air in. Talking to someone. Frustration, anger, and worry cause confusion. Confiding in someone generally brings relief from confusion.
That's true. My wife and I have an agreement. If either of us is angry or worried about something, we talk it out before we go to bed.
That's an excellent idea. Your wife is your partner. She has a right to know about anything that's gnawing at you. And there are 3 other people who have a direct responsibility for listening to your problems and to help with them. Your commanding officer, your chaplain, and your flight surgeon.
So we all know that's true, sir. But the trouble is that a man like Webster, who really needs help, finds it very difficult to confide in anyone.
You're right. And that brings up another factor. COs, chaplains, flight surgeons, and other aviators must learn to detect the signs of emotional disturbance and take action to prevent serious trouble. Let me tell you of another case where there were numerous opportunities to forestall a tragedy which killed an aviator. This young officer started to avoid his friends and was drinking much more than usual. He passed his annual physical, but his flight surgeon was aware of his drinking. He gave the aviator a lecture on the obvious fact that drinking and flying don't mix. But he did not ground him. His CO learned of his drinking and realized that his flying efficiency was falling off. He threatened him with a flying evaluation board. He did not ground him. Not long after this, he filed a VFR flight plan on a circular route to avoid severe weather. Two hours after takeoff, he crashed 40 miles from his circular route and on a direct route to his destination. Obviously, he had filed the circular route merely to obtain clearance. He flew a direct route in spite of weather warnings and terrain unsuitable for emergency landing.
It's a shame he wasn't grounded.
He's beyond grounding now, beyond all help. And no one even knows what it was that was tormenting him. Everyone with authority over aviators must realize that flying is a business that challenges your ego. Aviators can ground themselves, but they won't do it. If one of your men starts drinking too much, or is grossly depressed, or overly elated, ground him first, then lecture him.
If we can get that point across, we'll have come a long way. Well, thank you very much, sir. You've pretty well wrapped up the subject for us. We can sum it all up this way. As an aviator, you must realize that a serious emotional problem can be just as much of a hindrance to flying as a broken arm might be. Those you can turn to for help are members of your own team, all of them personally involved with your well-being. Your CO is responsible for your military capability. Your chaplain is responsible for your peace of mind and spiritual welfare. Your flight surgeon is responsible for your physical and psychological well-being. These are the men you can unburden yourself to. Perhaps like the TV commercials, we should end with a slogan you can use when your mind's jamming up. Talk it out. Don't bottle it up. The mission was not anticipated. At 5 in the morning, this man, the pilot of the ill-fated aircraft, was asleep in his quarters.
Captain Owens, sir.
Captain Owens, this is Major Hill, FOD. We've just had a call from the pilot of an aircraft at Zinjor. He's flying a General Harrison party on an inspection tour of installations. They've had engine trouble. It'll take 48 hours to repair.
Yes, sir.
They worked all night on it, but they need parts that aren't available at Zinjor.
Yes, sir.
Now, we'll have to provide an aircraft for the General immediately and stay with him for 3 days. His time schedule's very tight. Can you handle it?
How many are there in this party, sir?
Let's see. 2 colonels plus the General and his aide. 4 altogether.
I don't have anything but beavers in my unit. That would be pretty tight for 4 plus their baggage. Major Andrews in Topo Aviation has an otter which I can probably borrow.
Well, you're the doctor on that. The important thing is to get there fast. Now, call me if there's anything I can do.
Shouldn't be any trouble. I'll call Major Andrews.
That was the mission. Sounds perfectly simple, but note that it already contained one element that aviators must be constantly on guard against: urgency. Urgency here was very strong. The inspection team must not be left stranded. They must have transportation.
Major Andrews here.
Come on, Andy. Did I get you up?
Oh, no, Tom. I was getting dressed.
Andy, is your auto ready to go and available for loaning?
It's ready to go. What's up?
Just had a call from Major Hill. He's FOD. There's a general with a party of 3 stranded at Zinshore. Their aircraft is grounded with engine trouble. We have to get an aircraft to him and stay with him for 3 days.
Sounds interesting.
Right. I thought I might take the mission myself if I could borrow your otter.
Tell you what I'll do. I'll come along as co-pilot. I only have those 2 hours you flew with me since the otter was assigned to us 3 weeks ago.
Good. Perhaps we can get the general to help you with your plan to replace the beavers with otters or caribou.
I did have that in the back of my mind. I sure do need something that'll haul more than our beavers.
Well, at least he might expedite the request you submitted.
Right. Well, I'll see you at operations.
I'll be there in 30 minutes. Can you call the crew chief?
Will do. Goodbye.
See you shortly.
Now another note of urgency has entered the picture. Captain Owens is aware that Major Andrews hopes to gain the general's help in obtaining larger aircraft for his unit. This may prove to be just the help he needs. The Major doesn't want to miss it. The Otter was a new acquisition of Major Andrews' unit. The first, he hoped, as replacements for his Beavers, which couldn't handle enough cargo to satisfy his unit's engineer mission. Specialist McNeil was the Otter's crew chief, as he had been for some months prior to its assignment to this station. On a test flight the previous day, he had learned that the heater in the aircraft was not working, and informed Captain Owens accordingly. Operations had requested that since they were en route to Zinjor, they drop off 2 passengers and some plywood there.
A load of plywood out to Zinjor. How are your seats arranged?
Plenty of room for the plywood, sir.
Good. They ought to be out here any minute.
Sir, I started to tell you, the only thing wrong with the aircraft is the heater.
Doesn't it work at all?
It's practically useless. And I can't repair it until we get new parts.
Here comes a truck with the plywood.
Looks like Major Andrews caught a ride out.
Where are the passengers, Andy?
They'll be out in a couple of minutes. Here's a flight plan. Better put it in your chart case.
How about the weather?
They give the weather as marginal, but the forecast is almost 24 hours old. I didn't even bother to enter it. The only honest entry I could make would be GTAL.
GTAL, what's that?
Go take a look. GTAL is the only reliable weather procedure to use in this area.
Guess you're right. It's worse in Central America. I flew 1,500 hours in otters there and hardly ever had an accurate forecast.
That's a lot of otter time. Hey, it's almost 6:30. I told our passengers we were in a hurry.
Don't see them yet. They'll probably be here by the time I finish the pre-flight.
This may be their Jeep coming now. They had one waiting for them at operations.
Good. I'll just give it a quick pre-flight.
McNeil probably has everything in good shape. He's pretty conscientious.
Everything's fine except for the heater.
Yeah, I know. It needs a new igniter plug.
Hope we didn't hold you up.
No, but we are just about ready to leave.
I had to call headquarters. My orders are all loused up. I'm Tom Owens.
Pete Gilroy. This is Captain Flint.
Sam Flint. Nice to meet you.
Hey, how's the weather going to be? We were talking to a pilot just now who said the weather towards Zinjor wasn't very good.
Well, it probably isn't the best, but we're going to take a look.
Mountains between here and Zinjor are pretty hairy. Well, the 180's right at the top of the list in our SOP.
180-degree turn. If the weather closes in and we don't have an instrument clearance, it's our SOP to make a 180 and fly out of the weather.
Sounds like damn good policy. Well, shall we get aboard now?
Yes. McNeil will fit you to your parachute.
These were the events prior to departure. A few minutes later, they took off and climbed to 7,000 as they set their course for Zinjor.
Well, sure, we had the parts for that heater.
It'll be colder over the mountains. What's the minimum we can fly through the corridor?
We usually figure on 10,000, but we might try it at 8 if this visibility holds up.
What do you think about the weather, Andy?
It's too soon to tell. But I'm for giving it a real good try.
We're going to have an awfully unhappy general if he has to sweat us out of Zinjor for very long.
For my own reasons, I'd like to have him happy with the capabilities of Army aviation.
The first hour of flight was completely uneventful. They proceeded at 7,000 feet in good flying weather. The flying time was estimated at 3 hours. So at the end of the first hour, they had covered about 1/3 of the total distance. Ahead of them lay a narrow band of mountains, which rose abruptly to towering peaks. Flying VFR, the mountains could be cleared at 8,000 feet, though 10,000 was the usual altitude flown. But as they approached the mountains, visibility deteriorated. Broken clouds and haze forced them to climb to 10,000 feet.
Doesn't look good, Tom. If this were just a routine mission, I'd say we should turn back.
Well, there's some pretty big holes. How about staying at 10,000 and trying to work our way through?
Some of these mountains go to almost 14,000 feet. I wouldn't want to try it on this kind of visibility.
I'd hate to turn back and then find that it was clear as a bell on the other side of the mountains. Let's climb to the top of this cloud mass and see what it looks like from there.
All right. That way at least we'll be sure before we turn back.
This decision, arrived at because of urgency, was the primary cause of their accident. The weather ahead was obviously IFR, and they were out of radio range to refile. It is difficult to understand why two experienced aviators, both of them unit commanders, chose to continue the flight, but they did. The top proved to be at 15,000 feet, but there were still some fairly good-sized holes. Owens and Andrews made an ill-considered decision.
I think we can make it on top, Andy. There are enough holes to maintain ground contact.
Let's think about it before making a decision, Tom.
Well, once we pass the mountains, we can pick up the Zinjor ADF and let down even if the deck is solid.
I don't know, Tom. It'll take at least an hour to get past these mountains, and we're at 15,000 feet without oxygen.
Without oxygen? Well, there were portable units on this aircraft the last time we flew it.
Right, but I've changed the procedure. We only carry oxygen now when flight above 10,000 is anticipated.
We can make it, Andy. So darn simple. Just keep on this heading till we pick up Zinjor on the ADF and let that on their instructions.
You know we're breaking every rule in the book.
This mission weren't so damned important I'd have turned back half an hour ago.
All right. You hold it on that heading, and I'll concentrate on the ground and on the ADF. I'm already practically rigid with a cold, and we can expect a certain amount of hypoxia, so if we lose ground contact or don't get an ADF heading in 45 minutes, we'll make a 180, okay?
It's a deal. We'll turn back in 45 minutes unless we've got it made.
A conversation something like this must have taken place between the two unit commanders. A 45-minute deadline would seem to be a positive safeguard against trouble to two men who were already suffering slightly from hypoxia, lack of oxygen. But they'd overlooked one key factor in making their decision. Without an accurate weather forecast or continuous ground contact, they had no knowledge of wind direction or velocity. At 15,000 feet over the mountains, they had unknowingly encountered a strong quartering headwind with a velocity ranging upward from 50 knots. As they proceeded, they drifted further and further off their intended course, and the forward progress of the Otter was slowed considerably. As the 45-minute deadline passed, they were considerably to the left of their course and lost, but they did not know it. The intoxicating effect of hypoxia dulled their senses and their judgment. With lack of oxygen and extreme cold, they were about as capable as though they just had 3 martinis in rapid succession.
I don't get it, Tom. It settles on a station, then for no reason goes searching again.
Too far out, that's all. Must have a little headwind.
Haven't seen the ground for 10 minutes. We better turn back.
Turn back? Why turn back? Look, the ADF locked on like it was glued there. Why don't you call him on the radio again, Andy?
Zinjor Tower. This is Army Niner 2759er. Over. Zinjor Tower. This is Army Niner 2579er. Over.
Their ADF was locked on to the bouncing signal from a mountain peak, not the Zinjur ADF. Investigators later found that ADF was completely unreliable in this mountainous area. Back in the passenger compartment, McNeil listened in on the radio call. He and Major Gilroy were not suffering too much from hypoxia, but Captain Flint was very weak from altitude and the cold.
He's talking with Zinjor, sir. The reception's terrible, but I guess it's clear down there. They've got aircraft landing. Flint can't take much more of this. We better get down soon. Yes, sir, I'll tell them. Major Andrews says to cinch up the seatbelts. We're over Zinjor, and we're going to let down through the overcast. Now, there may be some turbulence.
At a point about 80 miles to the left of Zinjor, their ADF gave what appeared to be positive indication of station passage. This was undoubtedly caused by another reflected signal. Hypoxia and cold had so confused their judgment that without positive communication or instructions of any kind, they descended to penetrate the overcast. As they entered the clouds, they encountered snow and turbulence, which rapidly became a full-blown blizzard. As Owens fought desperately to control the Otter, there was a sudden and unexpected impact. They crashed on a mountain slope at an altitude of 12,500 feet. None of the occupants of the aircraft were seriously injured. In fact, the only injury was to Owens' wrist. He was obsessed with leaving the wreck.
out of here. It's 12,005. We'll freeze. We can't stay. Just relax.
Though several minutes had passed, Andrews still feared fire from spilled gasoline. This fear, plus Owen's insistence on leaving, led to the final fatal decision to abandon the aircraft. Approximately 15 minutes after the crash, they were ready to leave. They intended to return when the danger of fire was past. Actually, the immediate danger was already past.
We'll never make it. The snow's too deep. We can make it. The snow line's 7,500 feet. We could find a cabin or something.
That's impossible, Tom. We only have to get far enough away to be safe if there's a fire.
Sir, I've got an idea. If we put on our sleeping bag, we can roll down the hill. Roll? Yes, sir. That's a real steep hill. With our sleeping bags on, we won't sink in the snow. He's right. We can roll. We can roll right down the mountain.
That's how they did it. They put on their sleeping bags and rolled away down a slope so steep that they could not return. The cardinal rule of crash survival, do not leave the aircraft, was completely and unnecessarily ignored. 3 days later, rescuers reached them. Only Gilroy and McNeil were alive. The others were buried deep in the drifting snow.
As a flight surgeon, I've studied the reports of this tragedy and attempted to define and analyze the primary causes. There were 3 of them: urgency, hypoxia, and stress. Urgency, in this case, was of an administrative or peacetime nature, but it was a critical factor in driving these men on when obviously they should have turned back. In combat, Army aviators have to live with urgency. You must learn to recognize it, evaluate it, and deal with it in every mission you fly. Hypoxia, the second factor, is a medical phenomenon with which every aviator must be familiar. The feature of hypoxia, which is perhaps most dangerous, is its insidious effect on judgment. It helped to cause these men to follow a course of poor judgment and to completely ignore the dangers involved. The third factor is stress. Stress affected Captain Owens particularly, and all of the others to some degree, after the crash. The stressful situation led them to desert the aircraft. This was a foolhardy, self-endangering move which only served to compound their troubles. A stressful situation, such as that depicted in this film, can cause a breakdown in normal mental mechanisms. This breakdown is commonly called panic. Under similar circumstances, any one of us might panic. One effective way to combat stress is through strenuous pre-crisis training. If the steps to be taken following a crisis are well enough planted in your mind, you may be able to carry them out in the face of overwhelming stress. Briefly, you should know when to expect stress and realize that you're not reacting normally. Sit down and talk or think calmly after a crisis. Have food if food is available. Immediately following a crisis, the mind may refuse to accept the reality of what has happened. When this occurs, it is necessary to allow enough time to pass for this acceptance to take place. Helping you to recognize and deal with urgency, hypoxia, and stress are the reasons why you've been shown this film. This happened to men like you. It could happen to you. If after urgency and hypoxia had gotten them into trouble, these men had dealt with stress logically and stayed with the aircraft, there would have been 5 survivors rather than 2. This is a proven fact, not a probability. Here's why we know it's a fact. Members of the rescue party used the wreck for shelter for almost 2 weeks. They lived in it with relative comfort, using the plywood, parachutes, water, food, and clothing from the luggage. The crash victims deserted all of this to suffer miserable cold and pain, exposed to the elements
on the snowy slope of a mountain.